Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to a kind of weird discussion here. When it comes to the discussion between Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, one of the things that comes up regularly is, these characters are oftentimes cut from the same cloth, oftentimes are basically the same person shoved in two different locations, so who would win in a lot of these different matchups? And some of them are pretty obvious. Like, for example, Lindell versus Mustadio. Lindell ain't got shit. When it comes to somebody like Delita versus Vice, it seems like it would be a clear-cut thing, but there's going to be a lot more questions there. And so to that particular end, let's go ahead and start this little bit of a series off here today with one of the more popular ones here. So this is going to be Agrias versus Ravness. So the sort of church mercenary, I guess. Honestly, I still don't know whether they're an agent for the church because they regularly go against them, or if they're technically a mercenary for them. It's a little unclear. But either way, we've got them, and then we've got the Wallister commander turned basically everybody hates her Commander Ravness over from the ogre side of things. Now, I will say, class-wise, the way that I'm going to play this is that they are essentially going to be running their sort of default identifiable class as their primary thing. For a couple of reasons. For one thing, when it comes to Agrias, obviously she could run this as a secondary for everything, but then her passive slot always has to be equipped sword, and that's just kind of boring. So we're just going to assume she's having this as a primary, and then all of her other slots are open for whatever she'd like to do. Also, please bear in mind, it's going to be like a squint and you'll see it kind of thing, because I don't have Agrias built up on any of my recent playthroughs. So, yeah, she's just going to be over there. Her equipment is set up, her skills are not. We're just going to mentally fill those little blanks in as we go. And then over there on the Tactics Ogre side of things, we've got a endgame Ravness, complete with all of her goodies. Now, we're going to try to take everything into account, and unlike, let's say, something like the whole death battle format or whatever else, we are not going to be sitting here trying to gauge people's scaling next to how hard they can blow up a planet. That shit is dumb. So, instead, we're basically going to scale them off of the everyday soldier. Like, how far faster, how far stronger, how much more capable are they than the everyday generic grunts of their particular settings, and that's more or less what we'll scale things by. We'll assume a general sort of universality to, the dudes that show up to the army and what have you. So, at any rate, let's go ahead and get started. Now, the obvious go-to for this one, the obvious, this seems like she should win situation here would, I would assume that would lean towards Agrias. Usually that is the assumption when it comes to these two games. It's like, oh, she can do all these crazy sword moves, man. Over there, they're just doing basic hitting stuff. I don't know how many people realize in Tactics Ogre, that's like every single unit can do this stuff. But anyways, with that being said, let's go ahead and set the field here. So we're going to assume they're on opposite ends of the board. They're going to have a couple turns for setup to go and, buff themselves up, get within range, and whatever else. So you can see everything Ravness is working with. We're going to have to explain Agrias' situation here a little bit. So I figure her best odds are going to be something like this. You've got Excalibur for perma-haste. You've got the Sword Léger for permanent shields. You've got the Mirror Mail for permanent reflection, and the Ribbon for getting rid of most debuffs. Without this equipment, she is likely dead immediately. So we got to have that ready to go right away. So I'm going to assume that to some degree they have some sort of visual as far as what the other is potentially running, okay? So we'll assume that Agrias went and saw Ravness, and now Ravness has a chance to reply to this. Now, why would all of this stuff be a threat? So, since I'm assuming we have a lot of new FFT fans in the audience here, let me explain the threat that is the Valkyrie. It's worth noting that this is technically one of two really good classes that Ravness would potentially be running, her other one being the semi-unique White Knight, which is statistically stronger and way better in a team setting as a melee character, but right now, for this kind of setup, there's nothing really that they would be bringing to the table. So, the reason why this character is a threat is so starting off, we've got a lot of things that just sort of automatically happen to characters in this particular setting. So for example, Conserve MP means casting for free, Meditate means getting additional MP. So this means that essentially all MP is being funneled to these finishers, and these spells over here are being used for free. On both sides, they have different forms of infinite healing. So on Agrias' side, as a sort of default here, I'm going to assume for a reaction ability, she's going to be running Shirodori, or however the hell you pronounce it, off the top of my head here. For a passive, we're just going to go ahead and kind of leave that be for the moment. We're going to have move HP up for her movement. The reason for this is because as far as movement is concerned, technically teleportation would help, but she needs a way to heal herself. So the reason for this is, again, both of them have fairly similar kind of move sets, as it were. So one thing that's worth mentioning right off the bat is that as far as defensive layers are concerned, when we go ahead and take a look at Agrias over there, we see that they're going to have some degree of evasion coming off that flame shield, but it's not going to necessarily be that much. So we're going to assume at a baseline, the two of them are probably going to be able to hit each other without too much issue. And so this is when we get to Ravness' side of things, because one of the first things that we're going to bring up is a Duel the Avatar over here. So this is always going to guarantee at least a 20% chance to miss. The reason for this potentially being important is that this lasts a fairly long time and affects anything that is at all physical. The reason that, again, we bring this up is because this presumably would work for her sword abilities there as well. Additionally, as far as abilities go, we should probably cover those a little bit. Over on Agrias' side of things, the list is going to be relatively short. So the reason we're running Shura Hidori, by the way, is because of its ability to potentially counter a lot of finisher moves. More so, like, she needs to survive in order to be able to do something. Both of these are kind of going to be a case of who can sort of parry the other harder. But anyways, over on her end, we've got a chance of stop with Judgment Blade as long as an AoE, but not, or as well as an AoE, but not a whole lot of range on this one. Same thing for Cleansing Strike, but has a chance of Doom. This actually, I would figure, would probably be one of her best means of actually inflicting a win here, because Doom is one of these things that does not exist over on the TO side of things, and therefore would be uncounterable. You've got North Swains, which is going to have a small chance of instant KO. You've got Hallowed Bolt with a chance of silence, and then we've got Divine Ruination here with a chance of confusion. When it comes to instant KO moves, this one's always a little bit of a hard one to judge, because then technically you could argue that this is the best way to go at all times. For the sake of keeping stuff interesting, unless there's sort of like an interesting fight between them on these kind of arguments going forward, I'm going to assume low chance of just instant death, because why not, is largely just going to get put on the shelf unless it's fun. Like, this is the one that you basically click on if you're feeling lazy that day, and it's like, that behemoth has a ton of health. Fuck it, roll the dice, you know? That's mostly what it's here for. So, again, I think the sort of approach for cleansing is going to be more interesting, but theoretically, they would potentially have an instant KO here. But again, there's a lot of instant KO potential between the two. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of what she's carrying is specifically to counter the sheer amount of instant KO coming out on this end. Without Reflection, Salamander is instant death. Yes, even MP Shield, which, for example, in FFT side would count as essentially one take of damage. Over on the TO side of things, there are MP shield equivalents, and you can burn through them and still kill that unit with something like a Salamander too. So this still would count there. This would need to be reflected. There's really not many other options as far as that is concerned. As far as the Sortilege, it's here to make sure that Spiral Scourge isn't one shot, because there isn't technically a hard armor stat over on the FFT side of things, meaning that Spiral Scourge would be able to do its sort of like free DPS cleanup type of action that we see against monster units and stuff over on the TO side of things. So this would need a counter right away. So effectively that counters multi-hit type of moves. So this leaves her with a lot of her sort of like AoEs. A lot of her debuffs are potentially blocked by that ribbon. So again, she's got a lot of good effective counters, but this is where stuff gets a little bit interesting, because I want to check real quick if we have an answer for blind over on that ribbon. Yeah, it does actually block blindness. Okay. So while, for example, blindness is blockable, so for example, we wouldn't want to run something along the lines of a False Strike Cutlass, one thing that we could potentially do here is actually swap her over to something like a short bow. So Damascus short bow, let's go ahead and pop her in with one of these and go ahead and drop her with probably a shield of some variety. Let's go ahead and maybe just leave her with a Resenzi or something. Probably should just go for the Aegis, to be honest, but whatever. We're just going to leave her with some sort of shield here. Actually, if she's going to be doing lightning and such... Well... Do I not have a Loam shield? Okay, well, anyways... as far as elements are concerned, in the interest of not swapping elements a bajillion times for the purpose of argument, we'll just go ahead and say that any element is potentially nullifiable with different types of armor combinations. So, for example, right now she's got some lightning to help deal with water. Because the lightning beats the water element, which beats the fire element, which means that it prevents that from happening. And additionally, she's got a water shield over here to further prevent that water. So any element is potentially near completely nullifiable with the right setup. So we're going to assume something along those lines. Okay, I don't feel like swapping around a million pieces, but why would we go for a setup like this as opposed to these spears? Because while the spears would arguably be stronger in that particular scenario, essentially what we have over here is, well, dark weight. This is kind of an interesting one, because assuming that they're not fighting on a flat map, what we see is that she could go spend her first couple of turns setting up. So let's say first turn we get Duel the Avatar for a 20% chance to evade all of those different sword skills, and then, for example, we could throw in some... Sorry, my nose is being a bit of a bastard today. We could throw in something like an orb if we wanted to throw in a free damage tick in there. She's already got 2 full heals in her pocket. But theoretically, maybe throw on a Fruit of the Seraph just to be able to have a double charge here. Although, technically speaking, it's probably worth keeping a shot on hand, because that also could potentially be an interesting option. Okay, so she spends 1 turn just kind of moving freely, 1 turn setting up a Duel the Avatar. Over on Agrias' side, we're going to assume... Well, what does she potentially do? She maybe goes and takes a turn. She can't exactly buff herself with spells, so let's start her off with a Squire secondary. Maybe she starts off with Accumulate, and then she just double accumulates on her way, just tries to give herself a bit more hitting potential. That's kind of the downside of this whole thing, because again, she is permanently locked into Reflect, so she can't do a lot of these sort of normal buffs here. And in fact, actually, maybe Orator would be the sort of better option, because while Faith doesn't exist, potentially talking somebody into chicken form could theoretically be an option, since loyalty mechanics are a thing in both of these games, so theoretically they could be talked out of it. Anyway, going back to the bow, though, assuming that they don't have a completely flat map, there is no answer for Leaden over on the FFT side of things. So Leaden is a debuff that causes you to only have the ability to move up or down twice, meaning that somebody's either stuck on or below wherever they happen to be at. So they can't even hop down from a tall location, they can't hop up from a low location, they're just stuck there. It's kind of like breaking their legs in a different form, because they just straight up can't move. Additionally, when it comes to certain debuffs activating from either one of these, I'm going to assume that they are following each other's logic. So, for example, while Imperial Shot would effectively, its stop effect would not work against Agrias due to her ribbon, it would theoretically last somewhere like 2 to 3 turns, whereas a stop inflicted on Ravness' side would only last about slightly less than 1, because that's just how they work in their respective games. Additionally, Charm and essentially Charm and Confusion are basically the same thing in both these cases, since they're both going to be abilities that cause the unit to wander around, but they won't go out of their way to hurt themselves. So, as a result, there's not really too much to consider in that particular regard. Now, part of the reason, again, that we went for Shirahidori with respect to Ravness here, or sorry, with respect to Agrias there, is because its physical evasion being scaled with Bravery, which would presumably be fairly high. So this would mean that presumably it could counter a lot of these types of moves, which would mean that potentially we might want to get rid of one of these and maybe put on our Guaranteed Accuracy move, Guaranteed Accuracy item rather, which frankly has no other reason to be used in almost any other context, but might be kind of interesting here. So, we'll assume that they're going to take a turn to set up with a Mercurial file as well. Now, this effectively means that she's spending half her inventory slots going and dealing with this kinds of stuff right here. But again, if assuming that her spells are being reflected, assuming her physicals are being avoided, what kind of options is she potentially left with here? Well, that actually gives us a few other things to potentially play around with, because there are certain things that don't necessarily avoid much of anything, and to that respect, that actually switches us potentially into some of our other options here. Okay, sorry, one random sneeze break, but let's go ahead and move on to this here. So, yeah, you've effectively got Dispel for getting rid of all of that stuff, and additionally, when it comes to any kind of, well, a lot of Agrias' abilities, you do have active shields to potentially prevent against those particular things. I will also mention that it's also kind of an option here to go switch her over to a dark element, which I don't have a charm for here on this particular save file, but effectively would allow her to gain a further 30% bonus, as well as just generally doing better against divine stuff. However, it also would cause her to take additional damage from divine stuff, so things like, hallowed bolt or what have you, or not hallowed bolt, but divine ruination would theoretically do more. Now, that being said, again, previous thing of armor can theoretically nullify almost any element. So if we just go ahead and put some ogre stuff on her, that would potentially sort out that problem just fine. Anyway, so we basically swap out for ogre shield, ogre body, ogre helmet, just kind of squint and you'll see those, along with keeping this short bow, along with potentially keeping some items over here. Now, the added benefit of something like this is that it's not only going to be extremely resistant versus light stuff, it's also going to give her a phenomenal amount of physical resistance. And since Agrias' attacks are primarily physical, and she can't really afford to set up charge time on account of the speed difference between the two, that is potentially a pretty big deal there. Additionally, we could potentially run some luminant gauntlets over here, which I should go take off of somebody else. This is sort of the gear setup that would theoretically be going on here. I probably should have used my other save file, but it's a funny thing where I have Ravness on this one, but her side quest is such a pain in the butt to actually do that I have her on one set, and I have most of the 100% thing on the other save file, so whatever, just it's a squint and you'll see it kind of thing. So we replace the ogre set with these right here. Ogre only requires 3 of its pieces to be equipped in order to get the effect. So with that being done, that is something along the lines of a 50% strength increase, which basically increases physical defense by a pretty substantial amount, to the point that most physical attacks just kind of bounce off at that point. Additionally, we've got notable amounts of vitality coming off of the Illuminants, which also give access to Boon of Swiftness as an extra thing, as well as Paralytic Wave over here, which won't be used for the purposes of this thing because it's not landing at all without concentration, and I don't think we're getting rid of any. Actually, come to think of it, we probably could get rid of this over here in order to potentially spam some Paralytic Wave as well. That could work. And then you've got a bunch of other debuffs over here, over on the Ogre set. So theoretically, that is, I believe, actually, no. Stun is really the only one that doesn't have any analog and probably would not be blocked by the ribbon. So, okay, so either way, we've got a few uses of stun there for potentially some additional defense. We've got a little bit of Jewel the Avatar action. Either way, in this particular instance, this gives them a lot more survivability, to the point that something like a heal 3 would probably be enough to keep things rolling, while they keep rolling the dice on these other attacks. Now, what do they do about debuffs? Is there anything they can realistically do to stop some of the debuffs? Probably not, but also how many of them realistically matter. So along the list of stuff that Agrias has access to, we have Stop, which basically delays you 1 turn, which again, Ogre Set basically sorts that out. Confusion, which breaks if attacked, and if not attacked, there's not really anything they're going to be doing to themselves. We've got Silence, which is already being dealt with when it comes to their summons and whatnot. We've got what else do we actually potentially have over here that I am potentially having a bit of a brain fart on? Let's go over here. Let's go take a bit of a look. Oh yeah, the instant KO thing, which again, pretty unlikely to happen, but theoretically would be the way to go. And then Doom. But this is arguably, again, why I was saying that Doom would probably be the one to go for. Now, would Doom have an answer? Yes, it would have an answer as well. So in that case, if we're assuming that she doesn't have those summons anymore, which we're going to assume that she has to keep this here, because otherwise it just kind of throws that particular threat out the window. So we're going to assume she's got Ease. Ease would be able to get rid of that. So, and additionally, if somebody is, let's say, hit with Doom and Charm and whatever else, it's going to pick one of them, and their default action is to go and attempt to heal themselves of any debuffs, which would mean that they would go for an Ease, which would basically mean that that problem would sort itself out. Because Ease doesn't have any limitations on what it can remove, it just gets rid of debuffs. Now, granted, there is a very niche argument to be made between D-level and Doomed, arguably that it's, something that cannot be removed by ease. I feel like D-level is like they meant to have somebody's level lowered, but they didn't want to fully commit to, like, what if somebody goes down to 0 and then this becomes like a permanent thing or something? So I would argue that ease would probably get rid of it because it, again, doesn't have any other check for any other debuff. It just gets rid of a debuff on the list. So given the kind of limited amount that Agrias is potentially pumping out debuff-wise, I feel like this probably would answer that. So yeah, between Ogre Set, Shortbow, and this kind of stuff right here, this would essentially turn into just spamming Dispel until all of those permanent debuffs went off. Which would mean that Agrias' active slot would, or passive slot, would theoretically have to be dedicated to re-equip. I think re-equip returns on those debuffs. Which might be a very interesting counterplay for that, because who the hell else uses re-equip? So theoretically, she could keep putting away her equipment and swapping out for different stuff as she goes along, trying to get those buffs back on. I mean, it could work, I think. I don't know. I've never actually tried something like that, so okay, we might potentially just sort of have an infinite stalemate between these two. Agrias would probably have a harder time actually healing herself, though, because she more or less would have to be locked into items as a secondary, and because yeah, she can't heal herself with magic and stuff. If she heals herself with move HP up, that would be potentially getting run down over time. Like most basic attacks are able to outdo that. So if she's getting to the point that she's not able to, let's say, run her Shiri all the time to be able to block all that stuff, because again, bows are fairly accurate with their attacks, so theoretically, actually, come to think of it, this wasn't supposed to be Mercuriophile. What the hell am I doing? This was supposed to be Hair of the Unicorn. Come on, brain, use that item no one ever uses. Remember that one thing. What the hell does it even look like? There we go. Yeah, nobody ever uses this because bows are so freaking accurate they don't miss. So either way, while she doesn't have anything like Eagle Eye or whatever else, I would figure something like that would possibly work. Also, one more thing to potentially consider is one thing that we sort of skipped over earlier. Because if they do have time for a setup, they do have an infinite stalemate, they do have time that they're going and just attacking things, then there is the other option that technically Ravness has one more instant kill that is sort of on the table here, which is if she goes and sacrifices all of her other card slots in order to be able to just put on a shot, which apparently I have everything except for Inferno shots. Whatever, she gets a Dust Storm. They're all basically the same thing, don't worry about it. So shots scale very heavily off of your weapon skill, and so in this particular case, if she were to, let's say, instead go for another option, like let's say, do we have one of the ones that'll do the thing? Do we have a thing that does the thing? What a question. Is it another one we're just gonna have to pretend to have a thing that does the thing? Okay, we're going to use the Daedalus Blade that sucks so hard that nobody really uses that either. But we're going to pretend that that thing is going to be one of the couple swords that goes and raises your weapon skill. Now, why does that matter? Actually, come to think of it, we could probably also use the Coldia. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, so these things over here scale off of your weapon skill, okay? Now, there's certain items that you can equip to boost and overboost your weapon skill, which cause them to scale even harder. They further scale off of physical up cards that you can pick up on the field, up to a stack of 4 times. Now, if you are fully committing to this, which we're assuming at this point, if we're committed to all the rest of this stuff, if she is running Ogre Blade, she could probably put away the Crest of Fire. Let's say she goes and she gets her sword earring, wherever that's at this moment. Maybe actually we'll... No, we won't. No, we won't. We're not going to do that. Where is Guardsman? There you go. So, now we've got 20 plus this, 20 from, this one, pretending that they have it this time around. Okay, we'll put the Brynhilder because it looks fancier. Anyway, point is, they can plus 40 this thing, and then they can go and, get their natural rank over here. Why does any of this matter? Because with all of these things stacked up, even heavyweight tank units that have been training for health with a health boost oftentimes can be one-shot by this thing over here. So if there's any damage to Agrias whatsoever, theoretically this would also be able to work. Because it completely avoids defense, completely avoids evasion, it just is explode. So, theoretically we have that there as well. Additionally, we could probably just dedicate a second slot to this. Yeah, we could just put a second slot for one of them over here. Getting rid of some of those full heals, because again, with the Ogre set, theoretically heal 3 would be enough for that. So, I mean, at this point, you might as well maybe run some other weapons as well. Like, we have a kind of interesting thing of, is False Strike the same thing as Blindness? For the sake of argument for this one, I'm gonna say yes, but if it wasn't, then arguably throw out the short bow, run something like this, repeatedly throw out attacks with this thing. False Strike plus Dodge is guaranteed 40% evasion of anything physical whatsoever, so even the Holy Sword abilities would dodge that, or would be dodged by that. So, again, like, we are basically just trying to stretch bullshit in both directions here. But I figure that would probably be the sort of unanswerable thing right there. Because, okay, we have all of that set up, so now we have a situation where we're now arguing, let's say False Strike and Blindness are not the same thing, because Blindness gets rid of accuracy, whereas False Strike is a locked-in 20% chance to dodge that attack. So let's split hairs and go ahead and throw that out there, okay? Let's go ahead and maybe replace one of these with something like a Seraph. I think I have one of them over here somewhere. There we go. Yeah, so there's a Seraph over here. So basically, at this particular point, we could go ahead and get rid of Conserve MP. Well, actually, no, it has to stay on there because of the threat and what have you. We have Concentration for multiple debuffs, so if we've got Dodge for first turn setup, second one, assuming they've already picked up a skill card, run Concentration, then they're going and throwing out stuns, so 50% chance of a chance to just completely fail an action. Plus, then at that point, we're putting on 40% evasion on top of that. We're essentially building up a bunch of time, attempting to go and spam Dispel over and over, attempting not to move. At which point, the answer from Agrias would be movement in general. Like, if she goes and, let's say, puts on something like Teleportation, she gets rid of her passive healing, but something like that would potentially allow her to buy time and get away. Now, also, this kind of flies in the face of the sort of Doom strategy, which would require putting on pressure to prevent ease from being used enough times to get rid of it, which would probably be like 1 or 2 turns or what have you. And it's the speed situation between these two is kind of funny, because Agrias, with her other buffs, would be able to keep up, but in a natural state, Ravness would be dramatically faster, since she is naturally unusually fast compared with the other units in the roster. Agrias, I believe, is slightly faster, but not really. I forget exactly. I know her evasion's higher. But yeah, at a baseline, that's kind of where that would end up landing. So it's kind of a situation where Agrias gets the benefit if on the move, Ravness gets the benefit if staying more stationary. But again, with these shots over here, we basically have an unanswerable attack there, because the only response would be some sort of physical shield. Assuming Agrias is then running Summoner or something like that, presumably something like Golem would be able to potentially deal with that, because they count as a physical hit. But even then, considering that even ultra tanky units in this particular universe are able to basically be one-shot by this thing at full potency, what we're theoretically looking at is units across the board tend to be a bit less tanky on the FFT side of things in terms of their overall health. Like, they tend to use their bar less as a direct shield, except in certain cases. Like, even, obviously it's hard to equate bars between the two, because, like, even if you scale for stuff that would be in the field in both of those cases, you got dragons over on the TO side of things that are running around with like 3,000 health. Over on the FFT side of things, they're running around with like 500, and then these shots would then be able to do 50% of their health, but also at the same time, knights are able to reach that amount of health with their armor. But in this particular case, this is able to one-shot those knights in potentially far better armor. So it's hard to equate the two, but considering the amount of power that's coming out from, let's say, something like, comparing let's say a flare from a black mage with like a shot grenade, right? Shot grenades still able to completely bypass the defenses of the obligatory, hey, I'm a giant boss out of nowhere, final boss, right? They're not actually out of nowhere in both those cases, but you get what I'm getting at. Point is, they're able to completely blow past the defenses of a god, so In both of these cases, we see that, okay, something like Flare would do a significant amount. Something like Dust Storm, we see regular weapons completely bouncing off the guy, and it's still able to, by technicality, completely bypass their defenses. So I figure, in this particular instance, it probably still would be enough to do most of that. Essentially, she would have to upkeep Golem constantly in order to be able to keep up with these shots. Now, if she runs out of them, yeah, then that gets us right back to the stalemate situation. But at that point, potentially Dispel could be used enough times to get rid of some of those buffs, and then we're back to re-equipping. But technically, some of those buffs would be improved by re-equipping, by potentially doubling up on those buffs. But if it doesn't put them back, then do they have to take 2 turns to put one away and then put the other one back? I think they do. So effectively, we're seeing a situation where Dispel's getting rid of 2 debuffs. They're putting 2 buffs back, or 2 buffs. Sorry, I keep mixing up buffs and debuffs. But during that time, we've got Ravness potentially throwing out, attack after attack after attack, or what have you in between. So yeah, I feel like this is a weird stalemate. This is a weird stalemate with, I would say, like 60-40 in favor of Ravness, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd be curious to see what you guys think. Because yeah, the whole Shiri evasion thing, that's kind of the big fly in the ointment here. It's like even something like teleportation that would move them farther away, but that just gives more time for Ravness to set up for further attacks later. Like, I mean, if we're arguing again on the whole like blindness thing, we could also go another route with this whole situation, and assuming that's off the table, we could then just basically go back to bows, crossbows, all of that kind of thing. We've got triple hits on crossbows, and if that protect is out of the window, then we've still got that permanent stun effect coming off the Damas crossbow. We could it could come relatively close with matching some of the potential of the previous shot build with the Damas crossbow on account of the earring still providing half of that bonus. It's not going to be as potent, but potentially as good, and theoretically with a triple hit, each of those hits counting separately, that could potentially give them more setup time or what have you. So yeah. We got one of those situations. But yeah, I would say roughly like 60-40 in odds of in favor of Ravness for this one. Okay, so I was re-listening back to the thingy here and wanted to throw in a little bit of a post-thoughts kind of situation here, because technically speaking, there are a few bits and pieces that could also play out a little bit differently, depending on how we want to play it. For example, if we want to go down that route of just like one-shots all the dang time, technically speaking, you could go something along the lines of making the argument for, let's say, cursed weapons over on a White Knight there. So why would that matter? Well, in the case of the White Knight, there's situations a bit like this. So, like, this is why I decided not to really go down this route, / also, it might also be the better route, kind of a thing. But we have something like this. So we, for example, could go health, we could go fists, which he doesn't have fists leveled up. But we can also, let's say, go for Rampart Aura, preventing going around the back there. And then turn on Paralysis Blade, and then anything else here that we really want to put on. I guess we could put Resist Petrify. What the hell, why not? If she has some, like, Petrification off in her back pocket from some other skill tree or something. So, a couple of things on this, in which things get a little bit nutty. So, if we want to make the argument of going down for, like, infinite insta-kills or whatever else, you have the option right from the get-go to run, let's say, something like Talons or something like a cursed weapon or what have you, and essentially just going in for the dark, essentially the dark punch. So that would be something that Azelston has over here. So one of the finishers on this one is one called Retribution. It's available at range. It's something that they would be able to set up relatively quickly on the White Knight. And additionally is something that, since we're assuming that Agrias would be running light, for the sake of sort of filling out each other's mechanics, as it were, over on Ravness' side, if she were to be running dark, then this would essentially be 40% stronger in that particular situation. Effectively, light versus dark just means that both of them get an offensive edge, and in this particular case, the shots wouldn't even be needed. This would be an easy one-shot. Like, even in the post-game with stuff having a preposterous level advantage over you in this game, this on Divine Targets just, like, instantly deletes them, so there's a pretty solid chance that it doesn't even get as far as that one. Like, you got Protect active, sure, But again, even with that, there's a pretty solid chance that this ends up just punching through that. Glass pumpkin straight into this. Technically an option. Again, it's just kind of one of those things that's kind of hard to judge. The reason the paralysis blade would be on here is, again, that same old thing of throwing in the mechanic for losing 50% of your turns. So that also could potentially be a thing there. I don't think these guys get ease, do they? No, I don't think so. So technically, they might need to go for some other items as far as getting rid of debuffs or what have you. But either way, I guess in this particular case, we could equate like Doom and Curse possibly. I mean, it's kind of basically a similar shtick, I suppose, if you squint hard enough. Either way, there's a lot of like lingering questions as far as that goes. But the main thing I want to get across here is that, yeah, technically speaking, you could go for the sort of directly more powerful class and just go for something like Retribution, and then that's just kind of a one shot right there. Again, that's just kind of just like a split punch over there on Agrias. It's just kind of like the boring, hey, I'm going to just go ahead and punch the thing option. It's kind of dull. Another thing that's worth considering is the evasion angle. So I gave a huge amount of kind of leeway to Agrias there on account of evasion, and if they are running each other's mechanics, then we effectively have a situation where evasion doesn't matter if she just circles around the back. So seeing as there are no zone of control abilities in FFT, then, we kind of have that going as well. So essentially, if we were to, let's say, go back down here with these weapons over here, let's say give somebody a crossbow or what have you. In fact, actually, let's probably fill in Denim with this particular role because he has all of his weapons maxed out. So let's say he goes down the Lord route here. He goes and picks up Rune Fencer. Rune Fencer Valkyrie, it's basically the same deal. This class is generic in TO, just kind of to obviously throw that out there. But let's say we have something along the lines of he decides to go Dark, so we'll assume that they're running Dark here. So we get their Dark Summons, so we get some Hellhound on there. We go ahead and get some Light Shield over here. Actually, let me double check one thing. I think, if I recall correctly, light attuned and light touched and light attuned. Okay, so yeah, either way. So they go ahead and defend against that, and then we go ahead and pretty much throw in whatever else here. Throw in like a heal or what have you. Or rather, throw in a Dispel, because that probably would matter a decent bit more than the heal in this particular case. We go ahead and go for that Ogre setup. So here, let's go ahead and take this stuff off of you. Actually, there's another one of those things that's kind of weirdly missing in FFT, which is an unequip all button. Again, they already had this figured out. It's weird that that got missed. But in this particular case, we go ahead and we have this, we have this, we have this. We can keep the Luminance. We can go ahead and run Crossbow, and then we can run, which technically this would be the kind of runner-up Crossbow, but I don't feel like finding the other one. And so this gives a ginormous boost to all of their stuff. Shoes-wise, what do we got? I don't think they can't do Snipe Gators. That would be, if they could do Snipe Gators, that would come close to negating something like teleportation, seeing as their movement range would become pretty absurd at that point. But either way, these ones will do the job just fine. But these are the abilities I was talking about earlier. So Paralytic Wave doesn't really have an equivalent for FFT, so that's why I would assume it would get around the ribbon. Something like Torpor is basically slow, so it would get around it. Something like VOS, you can just boost yourself. Something like Firecrest, additionally, we might as well throw that on there, why not? Something like Firecrest is kind of an interesting option. It doesn't have the immunities that it did in earlier versions, but just the fact that it reduces speed. And also I want to point out, as far as her natural speed bonus and whatnot, you'll notice when we were putting the build together earlier, her speed was in the 70s. This is the main character, his is in the 90s. So essentially, her speed advantage is kind of notable. I mean, in the grand context of things, it's not really going to be the ultimate end-all be-all, but it is kind of interesting that that's there. Additionally, it's possible that we don't even need Conserve MP, considering how much stuff is flying back and forth, but that's just kind of there for now. But yeah, something like Concentration, for example, combined with Paralytic Wave, you open up with something like that. It's going to give you some pretty solid options. There's also probably going to be some items I didn't consider earlier whenever going and talking about the stuff. Because yeah, if their evasion completely doesn't count from the back, then that completely changes the equation here as far as the weapons that are used. So in that particular case, we could potentially go for something a bit more a bit more punishing, maybe. Maybe even do we? I don't think we even want to think about spears in this case because just ogre set's a bit too valuable in this particular regard. But if we were to, let's say, go for something like a bow, that potentially could give a few more notable options. Like we wouldn't even need that paralytic wave, considering the bow can just sort of do that on its own. We have all of these. Again, it's the leaden is one of the things I also forgot to mention is that leaden. One of the reasons it's also valuable is because it has a secondary effect that gets rid of evasion for all intents and purposes. It's not like completely getting rid of it, but it gets rid of 40% of evasion, which is more than enough. And this is also assuming for another thing, like if they are using each other's game mechanics, then we also have to assume that there's a maximum of evasion going up to 75% anyway. So there's again, there's going to be a lot of like you kind of got to just you kind of got to assume some things here, kind of a situation. But I just thought that was kind of neat there as well. So potentially we might have a situation where there's a maximum evasion type of deal. Another thing, if we do have a situation where he needs to open up earlier with an attempt to, or she needs to open up earlier with an attempt to go and prevent some of that offense, like assuming it is getting past defenses or what have you, which it's not really shown for doing. Like punching past defenses for somebody like Melly or Sid. I would assume that would be kind of the expected norm. In this particular case, I don't think so. It just doesn't seem like a thing that would happen. And additionally, on this particular thing, one thing that's worth mentioning is just like her sword move, something like stun on a damask bow would essentially have a set amount of a percentage to hit rather than checking for stats. So in this particular case, it could essentially just be shot and fired, but at the same time with dramatically higher defense and offense and things like that. And additionally, it's worth noting that part of the reason that bows and crossbows in particular are considered for this is that while they are a lot less effective versus targets in TO, with the ogre set, it is already going to become effective against most things. But additionally, we have the other wrinkle that technically they don't have a hard armor value, so this would effectively be like shooting something hit with fear and breach all the time, theoretically, kind of like it is with monster units. So again, just kind of something to maybe throw in there as a, it makes sense if you put it that way kind of thing. Okay. Might as well put a Jewel of the Avatar on here. Because, yeah, one of the things that was bugging me is, again, as far as the evasion thing. Because technically, again, F15 mechanics, you can bypass evasion by attacking from the back. I believe even Shiri is bypassed in that particular case, so that should work in that particular case. Let's see, Hair of the Unicorn, yeah, sure. Might as well just have that on there. Because, yeah, with leaden in place, it does last a decently long time. Like, we've shown this multiple times on various like 1v1 situations in this game, and leaden's just one of those weird things that doesn't have a counter in a lot of cases, and especially if you were to throw it into another game, it's a weird debuff that is very effective in terms of like trapping stuff, preventing it from dodging, all of that sort of thing. So it's just kind of a cool way to just weigh something down in a nice heavy blanket. So there's that. Additionally, also, I did end up going and testing it. This dispel theory that I was talking about. Yeah, it does actually work that way, that you can swap stuff out to go re-up those buffs and what have you. So this would essentially be a potential stalemate back and forth. Theoretically, depending on the items that are there, like you could get that, what the hell's that? It's not the Tyna Rouge, it's the original Tyna Rouge that goes by a different name, and you don't have to get it, or rather you have to get it out of Midlights. Forget what the hell that stuff's called. Whatever, that stuff. The original Broken Juice. So like being able to swap that in would obviously be a lot of debuffs coming in all at once. So theoretically, you could just swap a whole bunch of legendaries back and forth. But at that point, that is taking their entire turn, and essentially it's just Dispel doing this over and over and over. At which point they just have free setup time, so ultimately it's a stalemate that just kind of keeps on going. It's either they accept the loss of those debuffs and move on from there, or, whatever else. Like, timing-wise, that would fall in the favor of the one resetting those debuffs, in theory. But then again, if they also, again, have a gap in terms of, like, physical, magical, whatever else, if they even get rid of a reflection, if they don't have another immediate reflect option available, that is a way to go from stalemate to insta-kill trip-up, Okay, now that we've thought way too much about this, let's just go ahead and let the comments do what they do and talk about how, no, one of them totally would have just punched the other out of existence. Oh yeah, actually, one last aspect that somebody asked me to cover. Personalities. So, personality wise, first of all, I gotta say it's hilarious to me that so many folks like obsess over this particular archetype because realistically, no. If you're one of the ones obsessing over that archetype, you absolutely could not handle them. But for another thing, like that just sounds like a miserable experience from top to bottom. Like, let's just get like the bossiest person that completely doesn't care about you. Wow, what a great, great relationship choice right there. But for, excuse me, but for another thing, yeah, no. Between the two of them, it's kind of funny because I think that Ravness's really quick action time is potentially to make up for the fact that she never shuts the hell up. Like, there's multiple cases in TO. Since I know we're mostly TO fans over here, but again, we got a lot of the new FFT people here. Where, yeah, no, she'll just sit there chattering and chattering and chattering. It's like, dude, you are currently in jail, being escorted away by the cops to your execution. Would you kindly just let the cutscene end? Like, everyone's trying to rescue you. No, but I gotta wax philosophical. Oh, and if you don't listen to my 3 cutscenes, I'm gonna just die anyway. Oh, so dramatic. Anyway, so that's about that. Between the two of them, yeah, no, I would absolutely assume that Agrias would get the first punch off on account of just she never shuts the hell up. But then again, faster, faster reflexes over on Ravness, so it kind of just balances out anyway. Between the two of them, honestly, it does balance out quite a decent bit. Main reason that I'm leaning towards there's more ways for Agrias to slip up. Whereas a lot of the stuff on the TO side of things is just generally more like stable as far as some of these things that they can consistently throw out punches on and what have you. And again, I'm assuming that we're not counting for things like infinite grinding and whatever else because that argument seriously just gets nowhere. Like, oh man, I infinitely ground somebody in War of the Lines and now they do 999s. Yeah, wonderful. That's every RPG. Every RPG just ends with everybody one-shotting all the time. It's just no, that's not the fun part. The counterplay is the fun part. I mean, again, in this particular case, you could argue, oh yeah, then they maxed out vitality, and then just everything did 1 damage, and they one-shot everything, and also they have every single, okay, well, granted, a generic is stronger than any named character in this game, so there's that too, because then they could have just like every single skill on them at once, even more so than the Lord. so, so there's that. Anyways, though, that is going to be about that. So I hope y'all had fun. We'll put a vote up for what the next one should be, and yeah, have yourselves a good one. Take care.